he actually works out. So, going to go live in a sec. Good evening, hello if you're on YouTube, welcome to Fellcraftcast. I'm Hammy and the Hearthstone Half Hour. Hope you're well and good. We're going to be taking a look at anti-meta Shaman today in a bit more detail. If you've only got a couple of minutes, we've got a short 2-minute intro to this deck. You'll find that link at the end of this video or just below here. I'll link it on screen. Otherwise, we're going to run through this deck card by card. We're then going to play it a couple of times on a ladder and see how it works out. So, anti-meta Shaman. Always be a bit wary of people that say anti-meta. The meta, of course, being all of the cards, all of the decks, all of the strategies that are common at any given point in time. So, anti-meta is we've got a deck that can beat everything. But generally, what anti-meta decks try and do is they try and find weaknesses in the most prevalent decks and exploit them. So if you're going to be playing 80%, say, decks A and B, then your deck will be very good against deck A and B and reasonable against deck C and everything else in the alphabet. And we've got a wonderful picture of a Shaman being earth shielded against this big Moga, the ogre type ogre that's smashing down on him. Sadly, I've covered his face, but I'll link you to that art. I love the Blizzard concept art. So let's take a look at this deck list. It's going to be on the right of the screen for you to have a look at. We'll go through the cards and then we'll jump into maybe 2 ladder games and see how we go. Anti-meta tarsal, the bone that most English football players, or football if you're English, soccer if you're anywhere else, tend to break. But anti-meta Shaman. Right, so taking a look at this mana curve, we control the game in the early to mid game predominantly with spells, and we trade upwards with the minions that we have. We've got small minions, but ways of making those small minions more dangerous, e.g. Flametongue Totem. We then stabilise in the mid game with a bunch of chunky cards. And we've got the sort of off example of Defender of Argus, a little bit unusual for a deck such as this, but we'll see why when we get to the mid game. And then in the late game, we've got Alakir, Doc Boom, Sylvanas to grab control. So this deck is more mid to mid-late game. It's not a full-on control deck. It has a lot of bite in the mid game, and it's got various different options between spells and minions to be able to survive to that point. So you've got different options of what you can draw into in the early game. You could totally draw into the early game kind of spells and just nuke everything off the table. You can use minions to make some nice beneficial trades, or you can try and go for a sort of midpoint between the two. What do we have? Well, Earthshock. Not only can that benefit from the Azure Drake, from the spell damage totem that of course you can summon as a Shaman, but it's also silencing, doing a bit of damage. So more damage. Twilight Drake, if you're playing a handlock, that removes it in 1 because it reduces it by silencing it in terms of health and then does the 1 damage to finish it off. Punch through a tank in the late game. This also serves like any other silence. If you need to remove a Sludge Belcher, throw in an Alakir and then win, do so. However, the 2 damage rather than 1, at a pinch you can use it for late game. For early game, control, if you really need to be removing some minions, you can do so. Rockbiter's dual purpose again. Use this with Alakir as a finisher. We'll see Alakir in a bit if you're not familiar with that card. Or you can just throw it on any minion in the early game to get more for less. And this is a theme of this early to mid game of this deck. You are finding ways to get more for less from your minions, and ideally trade your smaller minions for bigger minions, making mana efficient, card efficient trades, effectively trying to equalise the tempo or gain tempo. Make sure that you're sort of ahead if you're not familiar with tempo. But that's what Rockbiter does. You could take a small minion, then trade a big minion away using it. You've used less mana's worth of cards, you've got rid of bigger threats for effectively less spend of cards and mana. Zombie Chow, only for early game control against aggro or indeed anything else. You can throw that down in the early game. You want to be making minion efficient trades like the ones we've just discussed. Mana efficient, minion efficient. You can take 2 minions down for the Zombie Chow. You don't want to be attacking your opponent in the face with the Zombie Chow because the Death Rattler is just going to heal them back up by that 5 damage. That is what Chows are for. Chows are a very polarising card. People love it or hate it, but here you need it to help you stay alive in the early game. Craggle benefits from spell damage. This is a nasty RNG nuke. Sometimes it's not going to let you pick off that Sludge Belcher. 3 to 6 is quite a wide variance, and it can be 4 to 7 of course with spell damage, just the 1 spell damage. So you can do some nice nuking. You can use it as a finisher if you're in a good enough position, but generally you'll try and use that probably to get the table under control, I would imagine. 2 Flametongue Totems. If you don't have your minions on the table, use those to buff up your existing totems. Again, it's more for less. Haunted Creeper, all of your other minions on the table, Feral Spirits. That can help you do some damage in the early game if you've got the table under control early game, which is probably quite unlikely, but who knows, it could happen. So if you're playing a control deck, this lets you chip away for more damage in the early to mid game, and of course lets you use the other little minions that you have to trade away opponents' threats that are on the table. So that is very much the trend of all of these cards we're taking a look at so far. Welcome, Irving. Good to see you. All the way from Mexico, I believe, Irving. So welcome to. Good to have you with us live. Feral Spirit, brilliant for Shamans, grabbing the table under control. Of course, you're overloading by 2, but those 2/2/3 Spirit Wolves are very, very strong in terms of giving your opponent big, nasty things that you've kind of got to try and punch through. It will absolutely slow your opponent down a whole huge bunch. And of course, with your Flametongue Totens and similar things like that, it's really going to give you some nice strong options for getting the table under control or doing more damage to your opponent. Hex. Pure up control, 2 hexes in a deck like this. Mech Shaman, of course, has like 0, perhaps 1 big threats. Get rid of them. And remember, of course, you can finish stuff off with the Earthshock if you need to. The 0/1 frog with taunt that's created by Hex can then be finished off with other bits and bobs. And for those of you asking, yep, I am a Fulham fan for my sins, but not so bad at the moment. Lightning Storm, anti-aggro control, another control option. Hex, of course, can be for big late-game threats and getting rid of those sludge belchers that are very pesky. Lightning Storm against aggro, you throw down some spell damage totem perhaps, or an Azure Drake, strafing away a whole board of mechs, hopefully. 2 to 3 damage at base, 3 to 4 damage if you've got spell damage, of course. 1 spell damage down. So control the table. Big Game Hunter for the big game control, be it against any Dr. Booms or anything like that. Big nasty Ragnarosses. I don't know if Ragnarai is the plural of Ragnaros. Who knows? 1 Harvest Golem, a little bit of a funny drop there, but that's going to make more sense when we get into our mid-game drops. But it's a 2-for-1 trade. Again, it's another more for less card. Remember, we're trying to trade more for less. We're trying to get good mana efficient trades, keep the table under control. Sacrificing that, getting another Golem will give our opponents something else to worry about. Mana Tide Totem. At the end of your turn, draw a card. Set this up ideally behind Feral Spirit. Your opponent may just decide to nuke it off the table. A mage might Frostbolt it. Loads of spells that can remove that. Could be silenced as well. But again, that's to help you get ahead. You're trying to get card advantage. You're trying to get the tempo on your side. If you can control minions, if you can get the right cards in hand, if you can set up this really chunky mid-game we're coming into, give you loads of big benefits. So ideally set up the Mana Tide behind a tanky, taunty threat in the early game if you can. Now, Defender of Argus. This is an interesting card in this deck. It works in 2 really nice ways. It can pin together your early game. If you manage to get an advantage or a stable table in the early game, Defender of Argus helps you create tanks out of Haunted Creepers. It can help you create tanks out of things like Zombie Chow or the Harvest Golem that we've just seen. So that will really make your opponent have a massive wall of tanks. So if you've somehow managed to throw down a Feral Spirit, and then a couple of turns later, or you've got other minions on the table, you can then throw down your Defender of Argus. Your opponent's just looking at a wall of tanks. It's going to be so hard to get through all those taunts. That will give you a good platform to get your big winning cards on the table. If for some reason you've had to wait and get these other cards down, then you've got a lot of big, crunchy, really nice mid-game threats. Azure Drake, Loatheb, Sludge Belcher, Fire Elemental will run through all of these in a second. Then your opponent's actually going to have to punch through those as well as the Sludge Belchers ×2 that we have. So you can create a massive wall in the mid to mid-late game, or even the early to early mid-game, just with Argus. So drawing into it, it's not going to be a make or break for you because you've got other tank options, but what it will do is give you even more options and make it so hard. If your opponent's got Brawl and they're a Warrior, yes. If they're a Shaman and you're mirror matching and they've got an area of effect damage, potentially if they're packing Baron Geddon, but it just becomes so hard to crowd control and punch through all of those tanking minions that you can create. So Defender of Argus, I think, a really interesting aspect of this deck, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out. Drake, triple threat, as we've always discussed, draw a card, spell damage for all the spells we previously discussed, and the 4/4 body that can benefit from Argus or trade things off the table. Shredder 2 for 1, as many of you will have seen. The random 2 cost helps you again get more for less, and also benefits from Argus. Lotheb slows down your opponent, benefits from Argus, trades the table nicely. Belcher creates a big mid-game wall that is not going to be easy to punch through. And you can see the sheer amount of tanks we can create. Opponent's going to struggle. 2/5 elementals, strong card, good health, benefits from Argus, great on the offense, particularly with Flametongue, and the 3 battlecry damage can soften up your opponent or remove nice threats, beg pardon me, that they may have on the table. Sylvanas again, for a swing in the game, throw that down, credit into a tank with Argus if you really need to, but make sure you trade it with stuff on the table so the death rattle ideally isn't wasted on nothing. If you play a lone Sylvanas, your opponent's always going to try and destroy it, so that effect doesn't come into anything negative for them, so it's not going to steal any of their nice cards that they might play. They'll always destroy the Sylvanas against an empty board before playing their own minions if possible. Try not to give them that option. Dr. Boom, everyone knows him at the moment. If you've not seen him, New with Goblins vs Names, pretty much a mid to mid late game finishing legendary. Spawns 2 bots. Those bots can do 1 to 4 damage on death rattle, and they're 1/1. So this is why so many people are playing Big Game Hunter. Destroy a minion with an attack of 7 or above. That's going to do loads of damage. So we have, to finish up, Alakir. Wind Fury, Charge, Divine Shield and Taunt. You have 3 attack, 5 health. Now drop a Rock Biter weapon on that. It's then 6 attack, 5 health, and remember with Wind Fury, 2 attacks, charge, you can go straight away. So Alakir for 8 mana, 6 damage. Alakir for 9 mana with the 1 of a Rock Biter, 12 damage, because he's going to have 6 attack, doubled up to 12. Alakir, if you somehow draw into Alakir and 2 Rock Biters and your opponent's got nothing in the way, 18 damage. 3, 6, 9, doubled up to 18. So Alakir is very much a finisher if you've not managed to lay down loads of damage already. Righty then, so that's our deck summary. Let's control the early to mid game with both trading with more for less and also spells as and when we need. Managing the overload, because we've got a few different overload options here. That's going to slow us down. So if we Lightning Storm, we're not going to be able to drop anything from turn 4. Or we need a good turn 4 drop, but then we need to have a strong turn 5 follow-up. In the mid-game, secure control of the table and start doing damage. Ideally win the game in the mid to mid-late game here with all of these strong 5 and 6 drops. And then Doc Boom and Alakir will be our finishers if we need. So, let us see how this flourishes. Is it truly anti-meta? Well, there's only one way of finding out. We're going to jump onto ladder at rank 8. Let's jump on in. Okay, so with this deck, lots of interesting options. The mulligan is going to be fairly key. So we're playing a rogue. I'm probably going to be assuming that is a nasty sort of oilish type rogue. So I'm going to be mulliganing for early game minions. So we want to have stuff that we can do some good damage with. I'm looking for the Haunted Creeper. I've got it. I probably should have kept that Earthshock, but the mulligan is pretty nice. Flametongue could have been quite nice, could have helped us buffed up. I hope that we draw into that Flametongue totem, but in the early game we want to be getting those sticky minions down. So 2 Haunted Creepers, alright, that's no problem. We know that there's going to be a big late game combo from this rogue, and they're going to want to try and throw down the Tinker Sharp Sword and similar. So, Lore Walker Cho. Whenever a player casts a spell, put a copy of that in the other player's hand. So I'm not going to rise to the taunts of that. I'm going to start throwing down my Haunted Creepers. If I'd kept that Flametongue totem, this would have been a brilliant situation where this could have been really, really handy. So there's actually no real need for me to play spells just yet. Lore Walker is to make carnage in the early game, but there's no benefit to that Lore Walker until I actually play a spell. So I'm just going to start trying to chip away at Lore Walker Cho. And although I do have a bunch of spells that I need to use in this deck, in comes a backstab, so I'm going to get one of those. Thank you very much. But of course my opponent's going to get a backstab back. We could see a Blade Flurry early game. So I've actually got full-on trading the Lore Walker Cho ability, Betrayal, nice. That's going to remove 2 of those. and that's going to spawn me just 2, so it's not quite enough to deal with that low. In fact, no, I've still got 3 on the table to deal with the Law Walker, unless the weapon finally no, the weapon's already swung once, so maybe a slight misplay for my opponent there. Shadow Step. Oh, interesting. That gives me a Shadow Step also. Now, of course, my opponent can't play that this turn, so I effectively get a sort of a semi-free play if they throw down the Law Walker again. So my opponent's been faffing around a bit here, and here is where Argus can come to our rescue. Backstab I don't need to use. There's nothing really wrong, I think, here with just throwing down an Argus. Argus would benefit my bigger minions a bunch more. But let's get an Argus down. Let's sound this out. Now, with a deck like this, they will throw down that mech in the mid-game. Possibly there could be a heal bot that could come in. Down goes Law Walker Cho for the second time. Sap. I'm going to get a Sap. And of course, this could be a mill rogue. The opponent could be trying to mill me by filling my hand full of cards. I can still punch this off the table. One of those goes down. A Brewmaster picks up Cho again. And I need to start using these cards to make sure I'm not going to be discarding cards. That is the thing. So, we've got an interesting game here. Maybe not the card that I thought, the game that I thought was going to be played. Right, so I need to start getting rid of cards here. Low if they have enemy spells costing 5 more next turn. My opponent wants to delay me for a big combo, so I need to try and thin out my hand as much as possible. Returning a friendly minion and it costing 2 less, I can do something quite nice here. Can throw that down, can throw that down, I can throw this down, and my opponent, of course, may well have a Blade Flurry, but can you see the carnage that we're sort of now creating here? Maybe a little bit excessive. Shadow Step Argus, good. I didn't... So, I don't know whether I've made a misplay there. My opponent is clearly trying to make me potentially mill, potentially keep the table under control. So, in comes a Farseer. With 2 mana left to go, we're not going to see Law Walker Cho hit the table again. And just a little bit of tank control there. So, opponent probably looking for the big win combo. Now, we know that the Tinker's decks go for... Okay. Interesting. I'm not entirely sure what they were trying there. I was thinking it was going to be a Tinker Sharp Sword Oil Rogue, so that's not the most full-on test of this deck. We'll try again another couple of games in before the end of this episode and see how we can go. So interesting, Law Walker Cho. I mean, obviously you could see me instantly faffing a bit, trying to sort of work out how to play around that particular card. I was getting worried my hand was going to get full, so instead of maybe playing the big cards that would have been the best plays, I was trying to empty my hand out. Interesting with Shadow Stepping the Argus, getting loads of tanks on the table. But as this kind of Shaman deck, that's not actually too bad, because you're going to be able to put up a big wall. Your opponent's going to find it hard to do. The Tinker Sharp Sword Oil, the Oil Rogue as people call it, tries to buff up the weapon, uses Blade Flurry, so that it does have ways of dealing with huge, big, chunky tables of minions. Okay, I'm going to assume this is Control Warrior until we see otherwise. We still want the nice sticky early game minions if at all possible. Don't really need Nurse Shock. I'm going to trade all of those back and go for the early game minions. We want to try and flood the board. Zombie Chow, Haunted Creeper, very, very good early game picks. Look for those. We've got a lot of hard removal. That would be very good against a control deck if this is a Control Warrior. And then we've got a lot of sticky minions that are pretty hard to remove. So we need to flood the board, control the opponent's large minions, or try and trade into our smaller taunts. Flametongue Totem could be nicely handy. So we don't want to overextend if this is control, that's the main thing. Brawls will be very, very nasty. A really good guide actually that I'm having a little look at on Tempo Storm, which I'm going to link to you guys in chat, and we'll also link it in the YouTube video underneath. Alrighty then, so we don't know if our opponent's going to be playing control, so there's nothing wrong at the moment. We're just chowing it up. Let's throw down a chow and try and make some trades. If they drop Acolyte of Pain, if they drop Armour Up, pretty indicative that we might be looking at a control deck here. Let's not count our chickens before they've hatched. I'm just going to totem, I think, at this point. Oh, hello Skype. So, obviously, keeping the opponent's armour down is fine. I don't have anything to trade. We've got a spell damage totem down. Could jump into an Argus next turn. Remember, of course, that's going to go off for a 5 heal and many different ways that we can grab. So, if we get a large amount of minions on the table, Control Warrior is not going to have a hugely fun time. Earthshock on this Acolyte is actually what I'm going to go for right now, because we want our opponent not to draw too many cards. So I'm going to zap that now. It feels a little bit funny using that, but I want to get that out of the way. And getting a nice big chunky table will really benefit us. So I'm actually just going to totem up again, another tanking totem down. That'll be pretty nice. Basically, Brawl and Whirlwind are the ways that warriors will try and start dealing with us flooding the table. In comes the Fury Winax. Probably going to try and use that to remove the zombie challenge, so I put up another tank. But this is where we can really just start causing problems. So I want lots of minions on the table. The way that I do that is not by Argusing just yet. A Feral Spirit could be quite an evil play here. I can Feral Spirit. That's going to overload me for 2. Next turn 5 I can actually coin into the warrior. I'm going to throw this down. So this is tempting. This is sort of saying to my opponent, so are you going to brawl or are you not going to brawl? What's your decision going to be? That is still a nice little juicy heal. We can try and put some pressure on. And there you go, there's a brawl. Now not many Control Warriors are going to pack 2 of those, so I'm happy that that's gone. Now that's done well for my opponent. Can then swing in, remove that if they really want to. We're going to see that, so my opponent's going to be feeling pretty happy. If I've taunted out that brawl, I'm quite happy with that. So I'm actually now going to use the opportunity to coin in. Could have actually decided next turn to wait, or just totem up and wait and then coin into a Doc Boom. In comes the Bomb Lobber, interesting control card that's been featuring in a bunch of people's decks. I've got a straight up control there. Do I want to be Argusing at this point? Yeah, actually I do. I like that. It's going to let me... I can let the Bomb Lobber come to me. Just do some damage. I can let the Bomb Lobber trade. He will trade for the Recombobulator. Unless of course there's another Fury Winax in hand. So next turn Boom. Next turn, and then turn after that I can Alakir. We've got a reasonable finish here, but we need to make sure that we can punch through our opponent. We've not really managed to sort of punch in as much as we would like. Boom will get us ahead. It's worth actually saying, and I forgot to mention this earlier, that I've swapped in Sylvanas for Neptulon. Now, I don't have Neptulon. Neptulon gives you 3 random Murlocs, gives you 2 overload, and it's a 7/7/7, I think. Now, the reason that's so good is that it effectively gives you 34 cards in your deck rather than 30. It gives you a massive card advantage, and those Murlocs are really, really... Generally, you're going to get some Murlocs that can trade. They're things your opponent's got to deal with. And in the late game, it'll suddenly make it a lot harder for your opponent to do a bunch of stuff. They may well have used all their control by that point. So, to Craggle or not to Craggle? I'm going to Craggle. Got lucky with a Craggle. I'm going to throw it on the Sludge Belcher. Sadly, that does not mean an Alakir next turn. What it does mean is that we can Doc Boom next turn into an Alakir the turn after. I've still actually got Hex. I could have Hexed into that. I've gone for the Craggle as a control card. Down goes Ragnaros, which means we can Hex. 2 targets for my opponent there. And they get lucky. And Hail Slood. Slood. Another Feral Spirit would be excess. Now, I think that really there's no other option apart from to Hex that up. Now, if I overload again, then we're going to be on turn 9 and we can still play Boom into Alakir. So I'm actually going to throw that on the table, kind of safe in the knowledge that is my opponent going to brawl those away? Probably not. Have they played Barongeddon? Yes, they have. So the final options that are kind of left are they could be packing a Death Spy, that one Whirlwind effect. Down goes Ysera. Okay, right, that could be problematic. Of course, there is the card that does X damage to all minions apart from Ysera, which is pretty nasty. Now, I can't remove Ysera in one go. When ahead, try to get further ahead, it's not going to help Ysera's dream cards are not going to help unless if my opponent's dead. So let's hail the Slood. We've got Slood in the house. Down goes an Armour Smith. I'm fully expecting perhaps a Whirlwind. Something that's going to do damage, armour up. Ysera, yep, it's going to trade in armour. A Whirlwind could cause some carnage. Because of course these bomb bots are going to go off against some things, and it's probably unlikely that the Armour Smith is going to get nuked in one. So, Spirit Wolf is in the house. Oops. Big Game Hunter, as we said earlier, a very obvious target. Nuking. Dot move out of the way. Down goes a Fury Winx. It's going to remove another minion. Now, I've got a... Oh, I'm double overloaded. That's the problem. Otherwise, Alakir... Can Alakir still take this for us? All depends on what the remaining 3 mana does. Aggro Pain hits the table. Right, Alakir has 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I've got enough. Alakir is going to win us this game. So that's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Oh, is that not enough? No, it's not enough. I can't count. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. In goes another dream card. Right. Now I do have enough because I can Alakir. I forgot that the overload is done. There we go. So that's our winning combo that we were looking for. Alakir with that Rock Biter. Oh, we can get into a bonus win streak. It would be criminal to see if we can't get to rank 7. So for the final game of this episode, let's just take one final game. So that was a nice game, and we managed to jump in there, really showing off more about what the deck could do. Now, Control is a good matchup for this deck because you've got a strong early game trading and minions. You've got a very punchy mid game, which is where a Control Warrior deck or a Control deck is trying to survive. They want to be throwing down Sludge Belchers, they want to be throwing down all of those decks cards that kind of allow them to sort of live for a little bit longer before throwing out all of the big cards. We managed to get enough pressure on our opponent in the early game that was no longer an issue. Now we've got another Rogue to finish off. Very interesting. And I've just drawn into the most horrific hand possible. We were looking for early game, we've just drawn everything that we don't want. That's my reaction. That is my reaction to that. However, let's play as if we mean to go on. We're going to get down the sticky minions, so we want the Haunted Creeper, of course. Zombie Chow would have been nice. Let's look to Flametongue Totems. Harvest Golem. All of this kind of stuff would be very nice indeed. So, what have we got? We've got a weapon down, no massive surprise. I'm quite happy to Fell Spirit because there's nothing we can turn 4 into. Nothing at all. So that's really baiting out my opponent. They could be looking for Betrayal, they could be throwing down that Deadly Poison and then doing a Blade Flurry even if they're sort of so effective. So we have that Piloted Shredder. I just don't have the trait that I'd quite like, but I don't really want to go all face. My opponent will trade one of those next turn anyway. Let's go for the RNG-ness of it all. That's not the perfect trade that we were looking for. The Rogue's not going to pick a secret. That leaves me very vulnerable, of course, to a thing what Rogues do. I'm going to call that Fan of Knives. Does 1 to all, draws a card. And then along with the weapon there could be a and welcome to Ask the Minion 1. Good to have you with us live. So interestingly there we saw Healing Totem hit the table. Forgive me for the typing and sorting out some bits in chat. So here, 2 options. We can throw down some tanks, or we can really slow up my opponent with Lotheb. I think I'm going to win ahead, get further ahead. There must be shadow, there must be something that my opponent is willing to play. Now, of course, Lotheb could be played later in the game, because we know that if it's a rogue, if it's a Tinker's rogue, then there's going to be nastiness. My opponent's going to want to weapon up, and you can see they just skipped an entire turn, which is powerful and handy for me. Fire Elemental will help me remove some of the rogue minions that they may throw down, so I'm not going to play into that just yet. But what I am going to do is fill the table with stuff. And our rogue is in a challenging position. They need a deadly poison. They need a blade flurry, and that's going to really sort me out.
We hunger for vengeance.
Backstab for 3, prep sprint, and you can see all these spells that my opponent's playing now would have obviously played out, come out last turn. Eviscerate for 5. Lotheb Luro has just been dubbed for some reason, hits the deck. And with 4 mana left, all of these spells Eviscerate for another 5, but notice how much of my opponent's control is coming out in 1 turn. And we've still got big minions that we can follow up with. Anodized Robocub. A golden Anodized Robocub. Amazing. Southsea Deckhand has charge, which can trade away the Robocub. My opponent's basically emptying their hand, and I'll be very surprised if next turn, if they don't sprint, they're going to want to sprint. They're really going to want to sprint. So, options. I can't not Dock Boo. The real question is, do I give them the card draw? They're probably going to take it anyway. So, I would very much expect a sprint here. 7 mana, or similar. Maybe they don't need to prep unless they can prep. Sabotage, random minion. Okay, there we go. Well played. So, we've not seen huge amounts of rush in this episode far, but this deck actually too interesting against Rogue. We certainly seem to be very successful. Got a game against Control Warrior, but what you've not seen so far, of course, would be the matchup against aggro. I really think that if you survive against aggro, you can see against all of these mid to late game decks. Not played Pally as well, of course, which has got a fairly smooth tempo curve, but against those decks, certainly good so far. So, not indicative, of course, of dealing with an aggressive start. Could be a little bit harder. We've not really drawn into loads of early game cards in either of those games. Once we got the Zombie Chow, never seen that random 1 Harvest Golem, for example. But hopefully that's a good little intro to that deck for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you are live with us, fabulous. If it's your first time live, check out youtube.com/Failcraftcast, as you see down in the left column there. You can see a whole bunch of videos. We do 2-minute deck guides. We do longer Hearthstone half hours and intros to decks like this, arenas and a bunch of other stuff. If you're watching on YouTube, do come join at twitch.tv/Failcraftcast. We go Monday through Friday live, evenings in the UK for a few hours, and you can check on at Failcraftcast on Twitter when we're going to be live too. Last but not least, the website is failcraft.org, so thank you so much for tuning in. If you're on YouTube, do like, comment, or if you think this thing's going to do better, please do comment underneath as well. We just want to make better content for you. Great to see you. Thank you for joining the Hearthstone Half Hour and Failcraftcast, and hopefully see you again sometime. Take it easy.